For my presentation, I will be talking about the CCOT prison or terrorist confinement center in El Salvador. So, this is a photo from AP News of the prison. As you can see, there are many buildings that house inmates, and you can just see how huge it is and how bare it is. So this was built because President Nayib Armando Bukele Ortiz became president of El Salvador in 2019. I found this from NPR. Bukele had the mega prison built when he started going after the El Salvador gangs starting in March 2022. It was completed with building and opening in only 1 year. It resides in Tucula, which is located about 45 miles away from the capital. It costs $115 million to build and equip with workers, self-defense equipment, and weapons. I also found this from NPR. There are 8 buildings that can hold up to 40,000 inmates each. So that totals up to 3,200,000 inmates when it's at maximum capacity. And currently there are about 110,000 people in CCOT. It is a maximum security prison where the lights are on 24/7 and guards are always watching the inmates. This is also from NPR. So, if an inmate somehow does escape one of the buildings, they have to try and escape by running through large dirt patch with guards surveilling these patches, and then they have to climb over a wall without getting caught or shot or killed. This is also from NPR. So, the prisoners inside the their cells are given white shorts and a white shirt and nothing else. Inside the cells, there are no blankets or pillows allowed, so the inmates are sleeping directly on concrete beds with no blankets, lights on 24/7. The guards inside also wear full face coverings to hide their identities from the inmates because they are deemed really dangerous. And whenever the prisoners are being moved, they are forced to bend over with their heads behind their back, with their hands behind their back, as shown here. This photo is from AP News, and all this information that I'm talking about right now is from NPR. In solitary confinement cells, there is a small light source from the ceiling, but otherwise, there's no natural light, or any really. Like, there's a tiny hole in the ceiling, and that's it. This photo is from a YouTube video by Ruhi Sennett, and this was when he was able to get a tour of CCOT. So, prisoners are not allowed contact with the outside world, including their families. These prisoners are kept here until they die. So, those two facts were also found from NPR. So, the main two gangs are Barrio 18 and MS-13. And right now, I will be talking about Barrio 18. And so, all the information I will talk about Barrio 18 is from Insight Crime on their article about Barrio 18. So they originally started as a small street gang in Los Angeles in the 1980s. They originally had mostly Mexican immigrants as gang members, and they dominated MacArthur Park in Koreatown. They became most powerful in El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras because these countries had weak governments and these gangs could exploit them easily. They started to systematically exploit public transport systems. This is from Insight Crime Barrier 18. And they also were big on extortions and disappearances. And these two things rose rapidly in El Salvador in 2012. And then homicides also rose in 2013 and reached a peak in 2015. But in 2021, Barrio 18 and MS-13 killed 46 people in 3 days, and then 92 people in an indiscriminate massacre where they just killed anybody and everyone. So that is the gist on Barrio 18. And so MS-13 was also, this information is also found from Insight Crime, but this time this is on their article about MS-13. They started in Los Angeles around the 1980s, and they formed to go against Barrier 18. And they originally called themselves the Salvatore Stoners, or the MSS. Mara is a Central American term for gang, and Salva refers to El Salvador. And they began to go to jail in large amounts in the 1980s and early 1990s, resulting in MS-13 allowing the Mexican mafia to have more control over them in return, with the Mexican mafia giving the gang more protection at, on the streets and in jails. So, going back to why it was formed, Bukele declared a state of emergency in 2022 because the amount of violence that the gangs were causing in El Salvador. These gangs have the most people in CCOT, are the and which is the MS-13 and Barrio 18. These gangs caused people in El Salvador to live in fear and kept most people off the streets in fear of being heckled or attacked by the gangs. But after being deported in the early 2000s, the gang extorted Central America's neighborhood and the drug market. But in 2016, the government tried to put an aggressive crackdown on this and tried to take down the gangs, but it wasn't a success. Um, and then MS-13 was in a low intensity war with the government and anti-gang death squads that had members of the military and police. These members weren't allowed to do it on duty, but they could do it off duty and just join those to try to help control the amount of violence that was happening. But during COVID, they took advantage of that crisis and took control of El Salvador, basically. So the government had to put curfews in place to keep their citizens safe. So some of the stakeholders with the CCOT prison is President Bukele, the government of El Salvador, the United States government, because the United States government has to deal with El Salvador, and currently they are deporting people to El Salvador to this prison. Human rights organizations, because this prison violates human rights. I will talk about that a little later. Gang members and their families, and then the people of El Salvador, just the regular old people, the people that are involved in this. So some of the structural problems within this prison is that does violate human rights. So the members of rival gangs are put together, and this can increase the amount of violence and death that happens. There are many beatings and torturings that are happening to the prisoners, that no one knows about because there's really no contact between inside and outside. Um, and then also some inmates are denied food, water, clothing, and health care. This is from PBS. And at least 360 people have died from the denial of these things. There's also a lot of overcrowding, such as shown as this photo. There's so many inmates to a concrete bed that there's really just no room for any of them. And because of this overcrowding, there is a high risk of skin disease as they are in close contact with each other 24/7. They're also mal they're also suffering from malnutrition as they don't get fed good food. They are fed food without protein and lack of nutrients to make sure that they are weak, to make sure that they don't have the strength to fight against the guards. And then another thing that violates human rights is that these prisoners don't have access to their lawyers at all or their families. Once they're taken, they are forever not allowed to have contact, and their families don't know anything about them and their whereabouts. So the plan is to get the human rights campaigns such as like United Nations, Human Rights Council, Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, Amnesty International, and Human Rights Watch to advocate for better living conditions and use lawyers to get things moving. And Amnesty International has already began to bring attention on these to the Salvadoran authorities to stop treating the prisoners like this. This is from amnesty.org. Another thing that can help is peer pressure from the public. So one thing that can help to solve this is people need to do more research on the prison by either watching YouTube videos or actually researching articles from human rights websites or people that have been in there, or who, yeah. I personally learned about this issue from watching YouTube videos of people that were allowed to film inside of this prison. We can also use social media as a platform to advocate and educate the other people, and we can work with government officials to uh, argue that the conditions in Tikal are not humane at all. Some advantages to this for the inmates is improved mental and physical health of the inmates, which can help with lack of violence, which can help with increased safety of prison guards and other inmates, improved internation status of El Salvador, shows that El Salvador is upholding the rule of law, and rehabilitation to hopefully get the gang members to not go back to their ways. It also benefits the economy and it raises the dignity for these inmates. So this is all that I have. Thank you.